trembled when the fourth artifact emerged from underground like a geyser of corrupted flesh and twisted metal. It had traveled scraping through the earth, accumulating organic mass during its journey, and now rose like a nightmare tower that curved toward the waiting scorpion creature. "No!" Selphira roared from the wall's remains, launching her power in a desperate ice attack. Julius also used his complete fusion, his duplicated beast materializing in gigantic size as it hurled itself toward the fusion zone. The impact of their combined assault was huge. Ice spears the size of buildings pierced through corrupted flesh, while Julius's massive beast and earth attacks tore chunks from the emerging flesh. For a moment, it seemed they might prevent the fusion. Yet the wave of matter and the pseudo-scorpion were too large. Much of their matter was destroyed, but in the end, the scorpion creature's eyes blazed with triumph as it prepared for the fusion that would make it unstoppable. Time seemed to slow as Ren realized he had failed. His gamble had failed, and now the kingdom would pay the price. The four artifacts connected, their energies resonating differently now that they had a new geometry. This fusion wasn't the gradual process they had seen before. It was instantaneous, violent. The resulting creature had 3 massive claws arranged around a central leg that, instead of being the support, remained supported by what were now 3 legs. Hundreds of small, frenzied mutant creatures continued throwing themselves en masse toward the new abomination, their bodies fusing with the organic surface like living fuel. Each sacrifice added to its mass, its power, its hideous majesty. And more kept coming. It was as if every corrupted creature in the deep golden ring had received the same call, converging towards this point from all directions like iron filings drawn to a magnet. The horizon writhed with approaching forms, a tide of corruption that seemed to have no end, with empty cores arriving at the lowest zone in the mana current and being reborn non-stop. Their fuel was practically endless, now feeding a regeneration that surpassed anything they had faced before. Ren, still paralyzed by the residual effects of the shriek, watched as the new creature turned toward him again. Its multiple eyes fixed on him with an intelligence that was both alien and uncomfortably familiar. He knew he had to do something drastic. The roots in his body pulsed, responding to his desperation. That's when he understood. Right. He had to overload himself with sensations again. The regret and helplessness about Luna's situation that he couldn't correct. The fear of losing his parents if these creatures entered the city, and Larissa hating him unjustly. How long would he have to carry all these responsibilities and decisions that were unfair to him? His emotions exploded again. But this time, he didn't control them. This time, he fused completely with them, allowing the hybrid energy to transform not just his power, but his very essence. Indignant, furious, fed up, outraged, he fused completely, instinctively. The black patterns spread until they covered every centimeter of his skin, and when the purple light faded, he no longer looked completely human. His eyes blazed with the same energy as the artifacts, but darker, uncontrolled. His hair floated as if he were submerged in water, and each movement left trails of elemental energy in the air like living calligraphy written in power. He extended his hands and channeled everything he had into a single attack. It wasn't 1 or 2 elements. It was all of them, fused into something completely new. A dark jade light that seemed to contain the essence of perfect and terrible balance. The attack hit the 4 artifact creature like the hammer of a god. The impact created a shockwave that shattered the wall. A section of the abomination simply ceased to exist. The spherical bases of the artifacts were exposed, pulsing with violet light, while the surrounding flesh regenerated desperately. But Ren attacked again before the regeneration could complete. Each strike was more precise than the last, targeting the connection points between artifacts and flesh. His movements were no longer human, each gesture flowing into ravenous attacks that carved away massive chunks of corrupted matter. The artifacts and flesh tried to reunite, organic tendrils reaching toward the exposed spheres like desperate fingers. But again and again, the small, enraged monster tore them apart with combinations of elements that shouldn't have been possible. For a moment, everyone thought Ren had won. The creature staggered, its massive form wavering as its power sources were repeatedly severed from their organic housing. Until Ren's negative energy began to wane again. Then the creature began absorbing the small creatures again, even faster than before. Not just those that were nearby, but all those approaching from the horizon moved faster, drawn by some invisible signal. Its regeneration process accelerated until it became ridiculous, new flesh growing faster than he could destroy it. Each regeneration was more resistant than the last, as if the creature was evolving too, learning from each attack and adapting its defenses in real time. And when the regeneration was complete, the creature was larger than before, not just in size, but in presence. It radiated an aura of malevolent intelligence that made the air feel thick and oppressive. "Impossible," Julius murmured, feeling for the first time that perhaps he had underestimated the magnitude of the problem. Ren regained consciousness at the worst possible moment. That's when one of the giant claws moved faster than his jade eyes could follow. Read full story at Novair. Net. The massive fingers closed around him like the bars of a living prison. The pressure was incredible, threatening to crush him like a small fruit. He could feel his ribs flexing dangerously, his breathing becoming desperate gasps and screams of pain as he tried to resist with all his enormous yet apparently insufficient strength. The sound of his bones creaking was audible even over the creature's roars. His enhanced durability, boosted by the fusion, was all that kept him from being instantly pulverized. But even that had limits, and he could feel them approaching rapidly. The creature retracted the claw, bringing him toward what might have been its face, studying him with intellectual curiosity before destroying him. But while he was trapped, while death seemed inevitable, something changed. Or rather, increased. The resentment. Was life really going to end like this after everything? This damn disgusting vermin? The destruction of intricate and interesting ecosystems? A senseless mistake was better than him? The fury that filled him wasn't just anger. It was existential rage. Rage at the unfairness of it all, at the cosmic joke that would let mindless corruption triumph over everything he had fought to protect. So then, when the claw began to contract for the final crushing, Ren did something impossible. Completely contrary to logic. Instead of resisting the energies of the artifacts and creatures anymore, he extended his consciousness through the roots and gave free passage to the energy flowing through the creature itself, and began to steal it in ridiculous amounts. It was like touching a high-voltage line with bare hands. The corrupted energy was violent, alien, and more importantly, it was immense. His body expanded, transforming more and more into a single entity with his beasts. The boundaries between self and other began to blur as power beyond his comprehension flooded his system. The fear, the immense pain, the desperation, all fed the roots in his body in ways he had never experienced. Each emotion became fuel, each sensation a conduit for more power. The seed threatened more and more to break completely, but the roots in his system recognized the energy, transformed it, made it their own. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, but instead of shattering, they filled with liquid light that held it together through Ren's sheer force of will. It wasn't easy. The amount of power was so vast that his body and the seed in his chest, now completely fractured, could barely withstand it. He felt like he was trying to contain an ocean in a cup, but he kept absorbing, kept transforming. The stolen energy roared through Ren's roots like liquid lava, threatening to disintegrate every cell of his body. The seed in his chest pulsed with violence that made his vision fragment into different colors. He could feel how his very essence was expanding beyond the limits he could contain. But still, he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The power was too intoxicating, the need for revenge too overwhelming. The light of the artifacts grew dimmer and dimmer, especially in the contact zone. Energy that should have been flowing into the creature's regeneration was being siphoned away, redirected through the network connection into Ren's system. The creature roared as it realized what was happening. It tried to release him, but it was too late. The connection had been established, and Ren was draining its very essence like a parasite that had found the perfect host. With each second that passed, the creature became weaker, while Ren became stronger. The exchange was visible, corruption flowing out of the massive abomination and into the small figure trapped in its grasp. The creature's movements became sluggish, its roars lost their terrifying resonance. The constant regeneration that had made it seem invincible began to slow, then stutter, then stop entirely in some areas. And when Ren had finally absorbed enough power that the claw could no longer keep him contained, he smiled. It was a smile that held no humanity, only predatory satisfaction and the promise of terrible retribution. The tables had turned. It was now or never. It was time to return the favor. Ren closed his eyes, concentrating all the corrupted energy he had absorbed into a single point at the center of his chest. The pressure was unbearable. His ribs flexed, his lungs compressed. Each heartbeat sounded like a war drum in his ears. The energy coiled inside him like a living thing, fighting against containment, demanding release. So he released it. It wasn't an instantaneous explosion. It was an implosion within the creature network, followed by a slow explosion, as if the universe itself had taken a deep breath and then screamed. The four-artifact creature, which had been desperately trying to free itself from the energetic connection Ren had established, froze for a fraction of a second. Its eyes widened as it comprehended what was happening. The stolen energy was being weaponized, turned back against the very network that had shared it. Then its body simply came apart. Flesh, bones, corrupted fluids, everything dispersed like dew under the midday sun. The scale was horrifying. Tons of organic matter destroyed in seconds. The four artifacts fell to the ground with metallic resonance, their surfaces now opaque and lifeless. Whatever energy had animated them was gone, drained away through Ren's impossible absorbed amount. The thousands of small creatures that had been swarming around the abomination suffered the same fate. One by one, they disintegrated, their connection to the network filling them so abruptly that they couldn't maintain coherence. The battlefield fell into absolute silence, broken only by the soft patter of dust settling where living nightmares had been moments before. For a moment, everything was peace. But when the smoke cleared completely, Julius felt his blood freeze. Ren still stood there, but something was terribly wrong. His body was wrapped in dark energy that moved with its own life around him. Tendrils of purple-black power writhed like hungry serpents, occasionally lashing out to scorch the ground around his feet. His skin had taken on an unhealthy pallor, almost translucent. The roots that had once been contained under his skin were now clearly out and visible. And when he slowly turned toward where Julius and Selphira watched from atop the wall, Julius remembered the words Sirius had spoken to him hours earlier. The boy could end up being a bigger problem than any supposed solution he represents. In the distance, more mutant creatures ran toward here again. The explosion had eliminated all those that were a few kilometers around, relatively close, but the pulse of corrupted energy now seemed to serve as a beacon for all abominations. Dozens, then hundreds of creatures converged along the same line as always toward this location. But Ren wasn't looking at them. His violet eyes were fixed solely on Julius and Selphira. There was recognition there, but it was cold. The warmth that had always characterized Ren was gone, replaced by something alien. Slowly he raised a hand toward them. "You want to add more chapters, plus vist novae tildefier, net." "Get down!" Julius roared, but Selphira's response was negative and instantaneous. She extended both hands and channeled her power in a single desperate movement. The air around Ren crystallized, forming an ice prison so dense it seemed more metal than frozen water. The formation was perfect, without bubbles or cracks. It was thick enough to contain a high, gold-rank creature. It held Ren for 3 seconds. Then it began to crack. The fissures spread across the icy surface like black spiderwebs, each one releasing purple vapor that smelled of ozone and desperation. Julius reacted immediately, channeling his beast's power to create a second layer of containment. Silicon minerals sprouted from the ground, wrapping the ice prison in transparent, mana-reinforced layers to give it diamond hardness. "It's not going to last long," he grunted, sweat running down his forehead as he maintained the mineral formation. The effort was enormous, requiring precise control of multiple elements simultaneously. "Selphira, how long can you maintain this with my help?" "I don't know," she replied, blood running from her nose from the effort. Her face was pale, strained beyond her usual limits. "Maybe a minute, maybe less." The ice prison groaned under the pressure from within. Cracks appeared in Julius's mineral reinforcement too, spreading like infection through the crystalline structure. "You have to get out of here," Zhao shouted beside them. "You're both at your limits, and the creatures are coming back." "We can't leave him," Julius replied, adding another layer when he saw the previous ones beginning to break. Maybe the creature network did manage to trap him in the end. If he escapes in this state. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone could imagine what a completely corrupted Ren could do to a city full of defenseless civilians. "Leave us. Evacuate everyone else," Selphira said firmly, her eyes never leaving the prison that was beginning to shake violently. Ice fragments were already falling. "Zhao, take as many as you can. Julius and I will keep him here until—" The boy who had always fought to protect people had become the very thing they needed protection from. Zhao flew off from where he had been, evacuating soldiers. "Julius, you're still very young. Go away too and—" "No! You can't stop him alone. Together maybe we can give him time to come to his senses and—" Their words were interrupted by the sound of something breaking. They pushed their strength silently again until the first mutant creature also reached the wall's edge, just as the prison began to collapse completely. But instead of attacking immediately or fusing with the artifacts, the creature did something strange. It approached one of the fallen artifacts and then began to dig. "What is it doing?" Zhao murmured, confused. The behavior was completely different from what they'd observed before. More creatures arrived, and each repeated the same behavior. Instead of forming new giant abominations with the artifacts, they were burying them, taking them underground. Their movements were urgent, almost panicked, as if they were trying to preserve something precious. "Are they retreating?" Julius realized with amazement. "They're truly in retreat?" It was as if the creatures had decided to abandon their convergence plans. Was it the loss of the 4-artifact creature? Was it Ren's information? Something seemed to have broken their objectives and sent them scurrying back to whatever dark places they'd emerged from. The initial problem seemed solved, but the good news lasted only a few seconds. The ice and mineral prison exploded outward with a force that sent sharp splinters in all directions. A mineral fragment the size of a spearhead completely pierced Selphira's shoulder, emerging from her back in an explosion of blood that painted the white ice crimson. "Sorry for the slight delay. Actually, I already had it a few hours ago, but I wanted to finish the last part and a few other things before sending it out. And time just slipped away while I was editing some visuals. Anyway, as always, like it? Give it a power stone. Pumpies, no, pass it. It's free and you help me a lot. Have some idea about my story? Comment it and let me know. Thank you so much for reading. So's. Selphira screamed, but not only from pain. Her connection to her beast and ice control was abruptly interrupted. Julius also collapsed. The effort of maintaining so many mineral formations had drained his mana to the limit. His fusion was cancelled. His body trembled as he tried to stand, but his legs refused to respond. Below, Ren rose free. The tendrils of corrupted energy moved around him like hungry serpents, and his violet eyes fixed once more on the 2 defenseless figures on the wall. But there was something different now. The predatory calculation was still there, but underneath it, something else flickered. Pain? Recognition? It was impossible to tell. He raised his hand again, power gathering around his fingers like dark lightning preparing to strike. Zhao, who had been coordinating the retreat before hearing the prison explosion, saw what was happening and dove downward, his wings forced to their maximum as he tried to close the distance between himself and his fallen companions. He fused to the maximum extent possible, pushing his body beyond its limits, but even with his speed enhanced by complete fusion, it was obvious he wouldn't arrive in time. Selphira, with the gaping hole in her shoulder bleeding freely, clenched her teeth until her jaw creaked. Refusing to give up, refusing to heal herself, and refusing to let the child she had promised to protect become the monster that would destroy everything they loved. She forced a final fusion with her beasts, a complete fusion that she knew would absorb the last vestige of her remaining energy and leave her helpless. But she was desperate. Her hair turned white as fresh snow, and her eyes became pools of deep blue that reflected centuries of accumulated power and wisdom. With the last reserves of her power, she created, not solid ice, but a single drop of water, imbued with all the purifying energy she had left. It was her final attack, her last hope. The drop condensed slowly, every molecule charged with intent. It was such a simple thing, but it contained everything she had learned about purification, about healing, about fighting corruption in all its forms. Yet she knew it wouldn't be enough. Ren was too strong now, too corrupted. The drop wouldn't reach him before a frontal attack from the boy could disintegrate it. The corrupted energy surrounding him would simply consume her purification attempt like darkness swallowing a small candle flame. Unless she put herself in front, and it was then that an intense light appeared in the northern sky. Ren, with his supernaturally sharpened senses, diverted his attention for a fraction of a second to observe the strange phenomenon. His head tilted slightly, a predator momentarily distracted by unexpected movement. The light disappeared immediately, as if it had been only an illusion. Selphira didn't waste the chance. She launched her purifying water drop with all the speed and precision that centuries of combat had taught her. Every muscle memory, every instinct honed through countless battles, guided the projectile's path. The drop cut through the air like a liquid bullet, its trajectory perfect, its intention pure. It left a trail of crystalline mist in its wake, the very air seeming to clarify in its passage. And then the light reappeared. Not in the sky this time, but directly behind the water drop that had reached just in front of Ren's face, amplifying its brightness until it became a miniature star that exploded upon touching the corruption. The intensity was blinding. The light reflected off the drop's particles and multiplied exponentially, creating an explosion of purity that swept the corruption from his face like a shockwave of clarity. For a moment, the dark energy that had wrapped around him like living armor simply evaporated. For an instant, it revealed the face of the ordinary young man he had been before absorbing all that alien energy. And in that instant of clarity, he saw something that left him paralyzed with terror. Larissa's face was there, only centimeters away with her eyes closed. It was she who had created the light, who had somehow amplified Selphira's attack. Her full fusion fairy wings and lynx horns were visible, both glowing with the same purifying radiance, their combined power focused into that single moment of intervention. The fear that pierced Ren was more intense than any physical pain he had experienced. In his microsecond of lucidity, he expected her to open her eyes. He expected to see hatred in them, rejection, confirmation that he had forever lost one of those who mattered most to him. He expected her to tell him how much she hated him for what he had done, for the decisions he had made, for the monster he had become. He braced himself for the words that would shatter what remained of his heart. But Larissa didn't open her eyes. She simply moved forward without saying a word and pressed her lips against his. The kiss was soft, warm, completely human in contrast to the energy that had been consuming Ren. It tasted of tears and resolve, of forgiveness, and with that contact, something changed in the nature of the energy surrounding him. Was it Larissa's light that finished the purification? Was it Selphira's water drop? Or was it probably some part of all three? The corrupted energy that had wrapped around Ren like hungry tentacles began to disintegrate, piece by piece, layer by layer. The violet patterns in his eyes faded, slowly replaced by the familiar green that Larissa remembered from more innocent years. The process was gradual, like watching dawn break after the longest night of their lives. The dark veins beneath his skin faded. His hair stopped floating, settling back to its natural state. Each second of the transformation seemed to take an eternity, yet passed too quickly. The monstrous aura that had made the air feel heavy and oppressive lifted like fog burning away in sunlight. And when it finally ended, when the last trace of corruption vanished like smoke in the wind, Ren collapsed into Larissa's arms, completely human once more. This marks the climax of the arc, and soon we'll be moving on to the next time skip. Anyway, as always, like it, give it a power stone. Sus. No, ++, it's free, and you help me a lot. Have some idea about my story? Comment it and let me know. Thank you so much for reading. Show all. It wasn't as if she needed to carry more things by hand when she had carriages full of indispensable items that would be transported from the castle. But perhaps it was her way of coping, so she didn't insist on carrying it for her in the end. Her enormous room had been converted into the recovery chamber for the 4 girls from their group of 12 who needed rest. It was filled with expectant silence, broken only by the occasional whispers of maids monitoring the 2 unconscious guards and the soft hum of energy emanating from the procedure they were performing. In the center of the room, 2 beds had been positioned to allow Hannah, with her evolved Venus flytrap, to extend her beast's thinner roots toward Mako and Shizu. The roots, which glowed with a dim light, were connected directly to the sleeping guards' mana systems at specific points, while Kira and Hikari coordinated the injection of processed crystals using their specific cultivation methods directly into their beasts. It was a technique that Wei had been teaching publicly for the past few months, though all of them knew it had originally been developed by Ren. Like so many other innovations that had changed how the kingdom functioned, his genius had found a way to accelerate recovery and prevent lethargy periods from completely interrupting the cultivation process. Luna began to stir in her bed, her eyelids fluttering as she gradually emerged from the deep sleep that followed prolonged double fusions. Leora was already half awake too, her eyes studying the ceiling with the thoughtful expression the mischievous girl adopted only when waking up. Of the 3 maids and 6 guards, only Mako and Shizu had needed recovery. Of the 3 princesses, Luna and Leora had required rest due to their rough power usage. Larissa sighed, adjusting her backpack once more. Her own fusion had lasted less than 5 minutes, so she had avoided most of the lethargy side effects her cousins had experienced. But that minor advantage felt insignificant compared to the emotional weight of everything that had happened. In a way, she also felt exhausted, not physically, but in a deeper way that rest couldn't easily cure. Luna looked directly at her from the bed when her eyes fully focused, and Larissa could see the familiar obstinacy that meant her friend wanted answers, and no more sleep. And not the simple answers given in official reports, but the complete truth about how everything had ended on both battlefields and what had happened after the creatures retreated and they collapsed from exhaustion. The 3 maids approached to help Luna and Leora sit up, offering them water and checking their vital signs with the professional efficiency they had developed during the past years of managing the consequences of forcing double fusions. While they prepared them and helped them fully regain consciousness, Larissa organized her thoughts, trying to decide how to explain a sequence of events that she herself wasn't sure how to process. Her mind tried to organize everything into a coherent picture. She had already been here in her room when Arturo's message arrived about the resolution of the situation at Yino's wall. That side, defended by Victor, hadn't fared any better than Ren's. The original wall had been partially destroyed and rebuilt several times, with temporary mineral sections filling gaps where original stone formations had been pulverized by impacts from the giant creature. The soldiers moved with the desperate urgency of people who had been fighting for their lives for hours. The creatures attacking were the same abominations they had faced on Yano's side. Massive constructions that seemed to defy biological laws, combining organic elements and ancient artifacts that had evolved beyond simple corruption. Victor hadn't been able to hold his position when the 4 artifacts in his sector had fused. The resulting creature had pushed the defenses backward, threatening to completely eliminate the defenders and allow hordes of lesser mutants to directly invade the city. The battle had been brutal, desperate. Victor's fusion huge Earth-based defenses, which had seemed so solid at the beginning, had crumbled like sandcastles before the tide of corrupted flesh and twisted metal. Arturo had been forced to leave logistics and intervene as a last resort, but that had been insufficient too. Even with his considerable power and tactical expertise, the fused creature had proven too strong. Until the Starweaver Knight faction used the twin stars. The 2 artifacts, one belonging to the Starweaver Knight faction, and the other they had confiscated from Sirius's Celestial Dawn faction during his departure, had been brought together and used to amplify a massive attack that had exploded and stopped the fused creature. The sight had been spectacular according to the reports. Twin beams of light and darkness had converged on the abomination, creating an explosion that had lit up the entire battlefield and sent shockwaves through the surrounding terrain. But stopping had turned out to be a relative term. The creature had completely regenerated shortly after the first attack. It had required 2 additional repetitions before it had finally decided to retreat, unearthing its component artifacts and disappearing into underground tunnels. The Starweavers and their opportunistic allied factions had claimed complete credit for that side's victory, arguing that their family artifacts had been the only decisive difference between victory and total catastrophe. The soldiers who had witnessed the attacks had confirmed their effectiveness, and public consensus had been that the Starweaver Knight faction had saved the eastern sector, Yino. But the timing had been suspicious. The creatures in the western sector had begun their retreat at the exact same moment Ren had launched his massive attack against the 4 artifact creature in the southern sector. right when the creatures had decided to bury themselves after Ren connected to the network. But with limited communication systems that took several minutes to cross such large distances, it had been impossible to coordinate the timing of all reports with sufficient precision to determine the definitive causality. Selphira and Julius believed that Ren's explosion had been the true cause of the general retreat. Their theory was that the energy pulse through the network had frightened all the corrupted creatures, or that Ren's information had shown them what the boy had said, that there was no way for the mutants to get under the castle to reach what they wanted. But it had been impossible to prove the theory without revealing details about the exact nature of what Ren had done, information they had decided to keep classified for security reasons. Meanwhile, the Starweaver's success had had immediate political consequences. The faction that had confiscated Sirius's artifacts had gained significant strength, arguing that their decision to act had saved lives. They had begun formal procedures to claim permanent control over the larger Starweaver and Yino territories, citing Sirius's abandonment and their own heroism as justification. Luna would have to navigate those political waters, even when she returned to classes, using her documented success in the northern sector as a counter-argument to her uncle's claims. But the legal battle promised to be as complex and dangerous as the physical battle they had just survived. Larissa continued telling Luna everything she had just remembered. The words flowed slowly at first, then with more fluidity as she described the events. She explained about the mutants' retreat in more detail after they had made sure they'd gone far away, about the future situation with the bad Starweavers, about the political implications Luna would have to solve little by little. Luna listened in silence, occasionally asking questions to clarify details, but mainly absorbing the information with intense concentration. When Larissa finished, the room remained silent for several seconds while Luna processed everything she had heard. But then Luna looked at her directly, and Larissa immediately recognized the serious expression in her eyes. That meant her friend had detected something that wasn't being completely honest. "All that information is very thorough, thank you," Luna said slowly. "But you didn't tell us what happened with you specifically at the beginning." Liora, who was beside Luna on the bed, nodded repeatedly with an expression of wanting to hear more about that too. Larissa blinked, trying to appear confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. "You fused and disappeared the moment you read Julius's message, when you realized Ren was with him." Luna sat up more in her bed, ignoring the murmurs of protest from Maria and Matilda, who were trying to keep her resting. She couldn't follow, as Liora and her had to keep defending the wall, but they wanted to know. All of it. "What happened in those moments, Larissa? What exactly happened where Ren was?" she asked, slightly blushing. Larissa felt her cheeks flush slightly as well. She had hoped to avoid the more personal details of her experience, but she knew Liora, Mayo, and Luna well enough to know they wouldn't drop the subject. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the memories to return with complete clarity. The moment she had read Ren's name in Julius's letter, something had broken inside her chest. All the time avoiding him, all the emotional defenses she had carefully constructed, had disintegrated in an instant. The fusion had been instinctive, desperate, driven by a need that went beyond logic. Her greater spiritual fairy and her horned snow spirit had combined and duplicated within her in a configuration she had never attempted before, forming a wing of light with each of the resulting clones. But the wings of pure light that had propelled her through the air at extreme speeds hadn't been the most useful help for the journey. Rather, her incredibly long jumps had been. With Larissa elevated high in the air above the wall, visibility was excellent. Each jump had covered kilometers, her fused form harnessing mana with great efficiency to maintain momentum that would otherwise have been impossible. She had been a blur of speed and light. Everything had happened incredibly fast, but paradoxically, in her light form, her thinking that had functioned much faster made it as if the entire world moved in super slow motion around her. During those stretched moments, while flying and leaping toward the epicenter of the strange but familiar energy she had sensed, her mind had been a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Of course she wanted to know if Julius and the others were okay. Of course she wanted to help if they needed assistance. But what had stressed her most, what had dominated every accelerated thought, had been a much more personal and terrifying question. What would she do when she finally saw him? What would she say after years of silence? What would she feel when standing before him for the first time since that terrible day when he'd had to take away the fragment? Would there be hatred in her eyes? The thoughts had swirled in her mind throughout the entire flight, every possible scenario playing out at accelerated speed as she drew closer and closer to her destination. But when she had finally arrived, when she had seen the scene unfolding below, everything had gone blank. The image she had witnessed hadn't been anything she would have expected, even in her worst nightmares. Was that really Ren? Was Ren really attacking Selphira and Julius? Her accelerated mind had processed the visual information at high speed, confirming what seemed impossible to believe. Ren, wrapped in corrupted energy, with eyes blazing intense violet light, raising his hand to attack two people who had repeatedly tried to protect him. She didn't want to believe it. But indeed, Ren was acting like the villain. The perfect moment to hate him, to reproach him for everything that had happened, to attack him and confirm that it had been a mistake to trust him from the beginning. All the pain she had been carrying, all the repressed rage, could have finally found valid justification. But instead of hatred, she had felt pure terror. Terror not of him, but for him. She had seen Selphira preparing a final desperate attack. At the same time, Larissa had pushed her last spatial jump without thinking, driven by pure instinct, positioning herself directly in front of Ren. She hadn't known exactly what Selphira's attack was, nor had she planned to use or amplify it upon arriving just afterward. She had simply jumped. She had been trying to take advantage of something happening, hoping that after Selphira's attack she could make some difference, but unintentionally she had arrived at the exact instant before the drop touched Ren. Unintentionally, her luminous presence had amplified the attack's effect, her elemental nature resonating with the purifying energy and multiplying its potency. The result had been that Ren's face, freed from darkness, had ended up directly in front of hers as the light gradually cleansed the corruption from his features. In that moment of time stretched to the maximum by her accelerated form, Larissa had looked directly into Ren's eyes as a small part of the darkness slowly faded. And what she had seen had destroyed her. Even filled with violet corruption, even distorted by energies that shouldn't exist in a human body, his eyes had been charged with emotions that even corrupt mana couldn't lie about. Immense pain, fear that went beyond the physical, anguish that seemed to be tearing him apart from inside. And above all, regret so deep it seemed to be drowning him. All of that exploding in him just from seeing her for a moment. Her heart had tightened with an intensity that had been physically painful. Was Ren really feeling so much upon seeing her? Had her mere presence affected him so much even in his corrupted state? She had known he was empathetic, that he would surely feel bad for her, but to that extent, to being devastated by emotional pain. Understanding had come like an avalanche. She couldn't hate him. Maybe she already knew that, but it was much clearer after understanding that he had been suffering as much as she had, maybe more. As the energy on his face had slowly cleansed itself of the dark energy, and his transformation had gradually reverted, Larissa had remembered Leora and Luna's mentions of their dates with Ren, their kisses on the cheek, their stolen romantic moments. She had resigned herself to the fact that she had arrived late, that her friends had moved forward while she had been hiding in her pain. But now she was also glad, because she had finally understood something fundamental about herself. Deep down, she simply couldn't hate him. So she had closed her eyes and given him the kiss she had been imagining after hearing about Leora's one and discovering Luna's secret one too. It hadn't been planned or calculated. It had been the most honest thing, a moment of pure emotional truth that cut through all the barriers, pretenses, and fears that had kept them apart. Ren had completely de-transformed, collapsing exhausted in her arms. But the situation hadn't ended there. Zhao had landed beside Selphira to urgently carry her in search of a healer, the wound in her shoulder bleeding profusely and requiring immediate attention. The mineral fragment had gone completely through, creating an injury that could be life-threatening for the mana-depleted woman, if not treated quickly. Julius had remained atop the destroyed wall, shouting at Larissa to get away, to be careful, that they didn't know if Ren was really stabilized. She had realized what had happened by then, but had been able to sense through her enhanced perception that the corrupted energy had completely vanished. "He's fine now," she had shouted back to Julius. "He's asleep." She had used her light wings to carry Ren to the top of the wall, where Julius had been able to personally verify that the last stain of dark energy was completely erased from his body. What remained was simply a normal Ren, without any fused beast or markings, vulnerable and completely human. But Julius had still looked at him with evident concern, clearly calculating the political and security implications of what he had witnessed. Larissa had cancelled her fusion to conserve energy, but had maintained her resolve. "If you can't trust him anymore," she had said to Julius, "then I'll take him away. I'll hide with him, and you'll never see us again." Julius had sighed deeply. "Don't be so dramatic," he had responded, which had made Larissa blush at the emotional intensity of her declaration. "I want to trust him too, but it's going to be difficult to deal with what happened," Julius had continued. "We'll have to make sure those who saw him keep their mouths shut. And we still need Selphira's verdict. But," he had paused, looking at the unconscious young man in Larissa's arms, "I agree with you. Sometimes you need to transform into a monster to stop monsters, and that's not necessarily bad." He had made another, longer pause. "But we'll have to treat him with a bit more caution from now on." Larissa returned to the present when she heard Luna's voice. "Larissa, why are you so red?" Larissa coughed in a fake manner, realizing she had been lost in her memories while her cheeks involuntarily blushed. "The things that happened were many, and are a bit complicated to explain," she murmured, avoiding direct eye contact. "I'm not sure how to do it, so I'd rather explain more of it when we talk to Ren face to face when he wakes up." The mention of talking to Ren directly caused a chain reaction. Leora, who had been listening from behind Luna, visibly blushed. Luna also turned red, clearly remembering her own date and what had happened during it. The three friends remained silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts about what it would mean to finally have that confrontation they had been avoiding. The maids exchanged meaningful glances, but discreetly kept their mouths shut, Mayo with the help of the other two. Some things, they had learned, were better left for the interested parties to resolve themselves. The events that had followed had been a mix of chaos for the healers and military reorganization. Julius and Selphira had collapsed from total mana exhaustion, but their condition had been stable, especially Selphira with her enormous vitality and prompt help from healers thanks to Zhao, who had suffered minor injuries and had also got extremely tired during his evacuation efforts, but nothing that couldn't heal with rest and basic treatment. As for Lin, she had been located by Zhao early on and transported back to the school, where Wei and Yang had used Mira's royal vine rodent to help her recover and not lose her cultivation progress. Sirius had not returned. The opportunistic nobles who had managed to exploit the crisis for political and monetary gains had found their plans profitable in the absence of a power to stop them. Since Victor was also knocked out, and only an exhausted Arturo had to deal with them for a while. They had gained legitimacy through genuine contributions to the defense, but Luna wouldn't let things stay that way when the time came to collect rewards. To finish with Ren's situation, first he had to wake up, and then there was seeing what would happen with the letter he still had in his pocket. The medical room was permeated with the soft but distinctive aroma of processed mana crystals when the 12 girls entered in formation. Leora went in front, followed by Luna and Larissa, with the maids and guards forming a protective semicircle behind them. The sound of their steps on the reinforced mineral floor seemed to resonate louder than normal in the tense silence of the recovery room. The two medical experts who had been working on Ren's unconscious figure visibly startled when the door opened. The main specialist, an older man with a parasitic Venus, had been extending delicate roots toward Ren's mana system. He immediately withdrew the connections with nervous movements. "Young ladies," the main specialist murmured, clearly uncomfortable with the presence of so much nobility observing his work. "We weren't expecting." "Continue," Luna ordered, with the voice of authority that had intensified after her experience as a battlefield leader. "We're not interrupting you." The doctors exchanged uncomfortable glances but resumed their tasks under the intense observation of 12 pairs of eyes. The assistant's parasitic Venus extended its specialized roots again, carefully connecting with Ren's main mana points. The crystals prepared by Ren himself, that Julius had kept in the castle specifically for these situations, began flowing through the organic connections, directly feeding Ren's sleeping beasts and accelerating his recovery process. Larissa watched every movement with almost painful attention, noticing how the tension lines in Ren's face gradually softened as his mana system stabilized. The procedure was fascinating to watch. The crystalline energy flowed like liquid light through the plant connections, and she could see Ren's color slowly improving as his depleted reserves replenished. "How is he?" Mayo asked when the specialists began collecting their instruments. "How much longer until he wakes up?" Leora added, moving closer to the bed. The main specialist straightened, wiping his hands on a towel. "Not long," he responded. "His friends from the academy have already awakened and been sent back to classes. As you should be too," he added with a meaningful look toward them. "Their systems are completely stabilized," he continued. "The procedure was successful. He should wake up naturally in the next few hours." "Good," Luna said firmly. "You may withdraw now." The specialists blinked, surprised by the direct dismissal, but upon meeting Luna's inflexible gaze and the intimidating presence of 6 gold-rank guards, they decided it was more prudent not to argue. "Of course, Lady Luna," the main specialist murmured as he headed toward the door. "We'll be attending to Lord Julius and other patients if you need us." "We won't need you," Leora responded with a smile. The door closed with a soft click, leaving the full group of 12 girls alone with Ren for the first time in more than 2 years. The silence was heavy, charged with Larissa's anticipation and nerves, all the emotional weight of lost time pressing down on her. Leora moved naturally to one side of the bed, and Mayo pushed Luna to the other, while Larissa remained at the foot. The maids and guards positioned themselves in a protective circle around the room's perimeter. Ren looked small in the big bed, younger than his current 13 years. His hair had grown a bit, falling across his forehead in a way different from what Larissa remembered from when they were together at the academy. The soft red strands caught the light filtering through the room's tall windows, creating subtle highlights she'd not noticed before. His hands were relaxed on the white sheets, free from the constant tensions he had developed during recent years of overwhelming responsibilities. The calluses from training were still there, but seemed softer somehow, as if rest had begun to heal even the physical marks of his burdens. Marco and Shizu had awakened recently, before him since they had received much less damage. "He looks so," Marco began softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Peaceful," Shizu completed, her own voice carrying a note of wonder. It was true. For the first time in years of guarding him, Ren looked completely at peace, free from the worries and pressures that had been shaping his features since he'd begun carrying that enormous weight. The furrow between his brows that had become almost permanent was smooth again. The tension around his eyes had relaxed into something approaching the innocence they remembered from earlier academy days. The hours that followed were the most tense any of them had experienced in a long time. Each breath Ren took was monitored, every small movement analyzed for signs that he was beginning to emerge from his deep sleep. Leora found herself nervously playing with her fingers, braiding and unbraiding strands of her hair in a repetitive pattern of anxiety. Luna maintained an external posture of calm, but her eyes never left Ren's face for more than a few seconds at a time, and the others could see the slight tremor in her hands, even if she thought no one was looking. Larissa simply stood there, memorizing every detail of his appearance, as if it were the first time she was seeing him. But there was something she had memorized first, the now familiar curve of his lips that she had thought about more often than she cared to admit. They watched the way his chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, the slight flutter of his eyelashes. Mayo attempted to lighten the tension with occasional comments. "At least he's not snoring," she whispered at one point, earning a few nervous chuckles that died quickly in the charged air. Even her usual jokes sounded forced in the expectant atmosphere. The guards maintained their positions with discipline, but even they seemed affected by the emotional intensity filling the room. It was Kira who named the first change. "His eyelids," she murmured, pointing discreetly. "They're moving." All eyes immediately focused on Ren's face. Indeed, there was a new subtle movement beneath his closed lids, as if he were actively dreaming or struggling to wake up. The movements had a pattern to them, quick darting motions followed by periods of stillness, like someone trying to focus on something just out of reach. Larissa's heart began beating so hard she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. The sound seemed to echo in her ears, drowning out everything else. After more than 2 years, she was finally going to speak with him again. The movements became more pronounced. His fingers flexed slightly against the sheets, and a small sigh escaped his lips. Luna leaned forward unconsciously, while Leora had to resist the impulse to reach out and take his hand. "Should I?" Maria began, but Larissa shook her head. "Let him wake naturally," she murmured, though her own voice trembled with anticipation. Another minute passed in absolute silence. Then another. Ren's eyelids continued moving, but they wouldn't open completely. His breathing changed slightly, becoming less deep and regular, the shift from deep sleep to lighter rest that preceded full consciousness. It was when he murmured something unintelligible that everyone tensed even more. "What did he say?" Maya whispered, leaning closer despite herself. "I couldn't hear it," Hikari responded from her position near the door. Ren moved more restlessly, his head turning slightly to one side as if trying to focus on something in his dreams. His lips moved again, this time with more clarity, and the word that emerged made everyone's breath catch. "Sorry." The word was barely audible, more breath than sound, but it carried big emotions. His eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened, blinking against the afternoon light filtering through the windows. For a moment, his gaze was unfocused, still caught between sleep and wakefulness. His eyes swept the room, pupils dilating as they adjusted to consciousness, then stopped abruptly as he realized he was completely surrounded. 12 pairs of eyes watched him with varying intensities of concern, curiosity, and something far more complex. He sat up abruptly, the sheets falling as he tried to process the situation. The medical procedure had left his shirt unbuttoned, and his face visibly flushed as he noticed the concentrated attention. He quickly pulled the fabric closed, his movements clumsy with embarrassment and lingering weakness. What?" His voice came out hoarse, broken. He cleared his throat, but the words still wouldn't form correctly. "Where?" "You're in the castle," Matilda explained softly, stepping forward slightly. "You were recovering from the—" "Is everyone all right?" Ren interrupted, his gaze jumping nervously between Mako, Shizu, and Larissa, those he somewhat remembered had participated in the battles, with Larissa's appearance at the end still feeling dreamlike and uncertain. "After the battle, I didn't know if—" His thoughts scattered as memories tried to reassemble themselves. The question of whether it was a dream or if it was real formed clearly in his mind, bringing with it fragments of corrupted energy, desperate battles, and a soft kiss that felt too perfect to have actually happened. Had he really done those things at the end? Had he really attacked Julius and Selphira? "Everyone is fine," Larissa responded, but there was something tense in her voice that made him look at her more carefully. Ren immediately noticed the change in her voice, slightly more mature than he remembered, carrying new depths that spoke of experiences and growth that had happened in his absence. His eyes focused on her for a moment, taking in the subtle changes in her face, the way she held herself with new confidence tempered by vulnerability. Then his gaze moved to Luna, who immediately looked away, a flush coloring her cheeks, then to Leora, who smiled at him with a mix of amusement and nervousness that didn't quite hide the relief in her eyes. Mako and Shizu simply nodded, their professional masks not quite concealing their own emotional investment in his well-being. But when his gaze finally returned and settled on Larissa, his entire body tensed, as if struck by lightning. "Larissa," he murmured, and there was so much weight packed into that single word, guilt, longing, fear, and hope, that the other girls felt the atmosphere shift instantly. Larissa had been mentally preparing for this moment for hours, running through possible conversations and responses, but now that it was finally happening, she felt as if all her carefully planned words had evaporated like morning mist. She began, then stopped, biting her lower lip. Ren looked down at his hands, which were trembling slightly. The tremor wasn't from weakness. "Larissa, His voice cracked slightly, and he had to swallow hard before continuing. "I need to ask for your forgiveness. I know I can't undo what happened, but—" "No," Larissa interrupted. The word came out with more firmness than Larissa had expected. All eyes turned toward her. Ren's heart constricted for a moment, but in the next. "You don't have to apologize," she continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I'm the one who should apologize to you." Ren looked up, confusion clear in his expression. The disorientation from just waking up made it difficult to process what he was hearing. "What?" But I was the one who— You did the right thing, Larissa interrupted, and now the words flowed more easily, as if a dam had finally broken inside her. You did exactly what my father asked you to do, didn't you? Following the king's order and saving everyone is what any good person would have done. And I, without realizing it, I was so selfish making you believe you had done something wrong with my silence. Luna and Leora exchanged glances, their own unresolved tensions momentarily forgotten. This wasn't the conversation they had expected to witness. The raw honesty in Larissa's voice was unexpected, almost uncomfortable. I was actually just weak, Larissa admitted, her voice dropping until it became almost a whisper. Too weak to face what had happened. Too weak to thank you for saving us all. Too weak to face you again, and— She stopped, the words catching in her throat like thorns. Ren stared at her intently, processing what he had just heard. The emotional weight of her words hit him like physical blows, each admission rewriting years of guilt and self-recrimination. Slowly, without him realizing it, tears began forming in the corners of his eyes. His expression remained completely neutral, a perfect poker face, but the tears betrayed the intensity of what he was feeling. The unexpected sight drew all the girls' gazes back to him. When he finally realized he was crying, his face flushed so intensely it looked like he might burst into flames. Without saying a word, he completely covered his face with the sheets, disappearing beneath white cotton like a turtle retreating into its shell. Ren, you don't have to hide your feelings. It's completely normal, Leora exclaimed, torn between concern and amusement at his reaction. She found herself thinking about how cute it was to see him being sentimental, and how much she enjoyed drawing reactions from him, like the one she'd gotten when she'd kissed his cheek. Though she also ended up blushing at that last memory. From beneath the sheets came a muffled voice. Don't look at me. The plaintive tone made several of the girls exchange fond, exasperated glances, even in his emotional vulnerability. Luna, who had been observing the entire interaction with growing discomfort, decided it was her moment to speak. She was completely red, but seeing Ren perhaps more embarrassed than she was made her feel a bit more comfortable. Unable to see Ren's face directly, she found the courage that had been eluding her. I should apologize too, she said, her voice higher than she had expected. Huh? Ren peeked out, but his voice came muffled from behind the sheets that still covered half his face. For what I did to you during our date, our private meeting, Luna continued, feeling her own cheeks heating up. I shouldn't have. It was inappropriate and— Love date, Mayo murmured, but Matilda silenced her with a look. Ren slowly lowered the sheets without realizing it as he remembered, looking directly at Luna. No, it didn't bother me at all, and— He spoke without thinking. The words came out softer than he had intended, and both Ren and Luna simultaneously realized what he had just said. Both their eyes widened. Luna turned red as a tomato, while Ren immediately covered his face again. I didn't mean to say. They both began at the same time, then stopped. Leora watched them alternately, an annoyed smile growing on her face. It seems I'm in the lead, but not by much, Larissa whispered to herself. But when she tried to speak, her throat constricted. Larissa was the only one of the three who knew perfectly what she wanted. But she was still a teenager too. Before, it had been easy for her to be bolder, because her interest had been more of a crush. She had seen him as a good option. Now she saw him as the only option. It seemed that since what happened with her father, making heavy choices had become a bit difficult due to the trauma. The weight of these decisions, even potentially good decisions, felt paralyzing in a way they never had before. Larissa sighed at her own immaturity before speaking about what she wanted indirectly. The only way she seemed capable of expressing it. Ren, I want to insist. I ask for your forgiveness. Attention returned to Larissa. You don't need to apologize. Although I don't want to give you false hope, I won't rest until I fully understand crystallization. Ren told her, still blushing. I want to be capable of fixing everything, he declared forcefully, and his embarrassed face transformed into an intense one. I don't want to have any more regrets. The resolve in his voice was powerful. Ren had lowered the sheets again, this time with an even more serious expression. He reached toward his pocket. So Luna too, he said, while searching inside. There's something I want to give you. He extracted a wrinkled letter, burned in some parts by recent events. The paper was yellowed and fragile, bearing the marks of whatever battles he'd been through. "Your father left me this. For some reason, he didn't take it from me before leaving. I thought about reading it with what seemed like his implicit permission, but it didn't seem right in the end without you knowing." Luna became completely still, staring at the letter as if it was something toxic. Her entire body tensed, and her breathing became shallow. "It's from my father," she whispered, and there was something in her voice. "You can read it if you want," she offered to Ren, extending her hand toward him. "As atonement for what I put you through that day." Both turned red again. But this time Luna couldn't bear the embarrassment anymore, and escaped with a shadow leap, vanishing from the room in a swirl of darkness. Larissa sighed. In the back of the room, the maids and guards exchanged meaningful glances. Matilda had to cover a small smile with her hand, while Maria tried to maintain professional composure despite the emotional drama unfolding before her. Leora observed the entire exchange with a complex mix of emotions. Part of her felt relieved that the conversation had moved toward Luna and Larissa, giving her time to process her own feelings. But another part, a part she didn't want to examine too closely, felt something that might have been jealousy, seeing the obvious chemistry between Ren, Larissa, and Luna. The competitive streak that had always driven her felt threatened by the depth of connection she was witnessing, even as she genuinely cared for all three of them. Mayo, for her part, seemed genuinely entertained by all the drama unfolding before her eyes. "You know what?" she announced. "I think you need to have much longer and more frequent conversations like this." "Mayo," all the girls protested in unison, which only made her laugh more. The envelope remained in Ren's extended hand, a physical reminder of all the complicated relationships and unresolved emotions that still needed to be addressed. Had left the room. Now Ren looked at the wrinkled letter he held in his own hand, the one he had been keeping since Sirius had given it to him. With Luna's permission, technically he could read it, but something about doing so felt profoundly private, as if he were about to invade a space that didn't belong to him. He swallowed hard, his fingers brushing the paper damaged by recent events. The texture was rough where energy had singed the edges, and the creases were deep from being folded and unfolded countless times. Leora leaned forward, her curiosity obvious. "Are you going to open it?" Larissa also moved closer, though she tried to disguise her interest. "For a long time now, I've always wondered. Even the guards seemed to be paying more attention than usual, their rigid postures betrayed by the way their eyes subtly shifted toward the envelope." It was then that Mayo began to laugh. The sound was soft at first, a contained laugh she tried to suppress by covering her mouth with her hand, but the laughter intensified, becoming something she clearly couldn't control. Matilda looked at her with an exasperated expression and pushed her gently, trying to silence her. "Mayo, stop." Maria observed her two companions with evident confusion. She was the only one of the maids who clearly didn't understand what was so funny. But Mayo's laughter didn't stop in time. Now everyone was staring at her, and when she saw their expectant faces, she laughed even harder. Matilda grabbed her head in a gesture of total surrender. "What's so funny?" Ren asked, disconcerted. Mayo straightened up, composing her expression into something more theatrical. There was a gleam in her eyes that suggested she was about to enjoy this immensely. "So, do you want to know what the curse words are?" she asked in a conspiratorial tone. Larissa sighed deeply. "That lie is old, Mayo. We already knew from that time that there are no cursed words." "Ah," Mayo raised a finger, smiling broadly. "But that's where you're wrong. What was a lie was that the words would make you physically vomit." However, her smile became more genuine, softer. "I definitely think that in one way or another, those words are cursed, although Luna doesn't like me calling them that." Mayo's manner pattern was completely honest. She wasn't lying this time like she had years ago. Those present were visibly surprised. Leora sat up straighter, while Larissa frowned, now interested. Ren looked at the torn and burned letter in his hand, but Mayo shook her head. "That one is so damaged that maybe it's not clear," she said, while rummaging in her own bag. She extracted 3 more envelopes, all equally wrinkled but not burned, and in better condition than Ren's. The confusion in the room was visible in everyone's faces. "The letter is always the same," Mayo explained, her tone now more serious. "Sirius would give our Luna a new one every so often, because she always squeezes and manipulates it a lot when she's stressed. It's like a tradition they had. She paused, some sadness crossing her expression. Although since Luna got angry with him, they didn't exchange another the last promised day. Why would Sirius have to give her the same letter over and over? Leora asked. Mayo smiled again, but this time there was understanding in her expression. I don't know. It's cryptic. Luna knows nobody will really understand it. Maybe that's why she doesn't mind if people read it. With deliberate movements, Mayo opened one of the wrinkled letters. Everyone swallowed hard, and she began to read. I love you, my bright star. I love you, light of my nights. I love you more than the stars. I love you with every breath. I love you, my little constellation. I love you beyond measure. I love you infinitely. I love you boundlessly. I love you without end. I love you eternally. The repetitions went on, each variation slightly different but carrying the same obsessive weight. Mayo's voice took on an almost hypnotic quality as the declarations continued. Ren felt his cheeks heating up. The others exchanged uncomfortable glances as Mayo continued without pause. But when Ren opened the one he had, he realized that indeed they were the same. Hello, my sweet light. Hello, my precious one. Hello, my invaluable treasure. Hello, my reason for existing. Hello, my little drop of honey. Hello, my everything. Hello, my universe. Hello, my dawn. Hello, my dusk. Hello, my eternal flame. Please stop, Larissa murmured, her own face flushing. But Mayo didn't stop. With all my heart, with all my soul, with every piece of my being, with everything I am, with everything I have, with my entire existence, with my last breath, with unwavering devotion, with absolute certainty, always and forever, eternally and completely, through all time and space. The declarations continued for several more lines, each one piling upon the last. Then Mayo reached what appeared to be the farewell section, and her voice took on an even more theatrical quality. Goodbye, my treasure. Farewell, my precious star. Until we meet again, my light. See you soon, my constellation. I'll return to you, my dawn. Wait for me, my eternal flame. Don't forget me, my everything. Remember me always, my reason for existing. Hold me in your heart, my sweet light. Keep me close, my little drop of honey. The farewells went on, until light returns to darkness, until my heart finds yours once more. Mayo paused to catch her breath, and several people in the room shifted uncomfortably. The repetitive, almost manic quality of the words was starting to feel oppressive. The list continued. Mayo reached a section that made everyone feel a strange chill run down their spines. I promise, 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 I promise. The word promise repeated line after line, filling almost half a page. The handwriting became slightly more frantic as it continued, the letters pressing harder into the paper with each repetition. And finally, Mayo concluded, her voice softening. I miss you, my light. I miss you more than words can express. I miss you with every heartbeat. I miss you in every moment you're not here. I miss you when I wake. I miss you when I sleep. I miss you in daylight and in darkness. I miss you. I miss you. I miss you. She paused, then read the final line with particular emphasis. I will never abandon you. Never, never, never. The silence that followed was uncomfortable and heavy. Nobody seemed to know exactly how to react to what they had just heard. That's, Ren began, but couldn't find adequate words. Uncomfortable, Leora completed bluntly, twisting in her seat. Cursed indeed. It's intense, Larissa corrected, though she didn't seem to disagree with Leora's assessment. Mayo laughed softly. Matilda and I have seen them many times, but unfortunately, Luna has never told us what they really mean. It's something that started arriving shortly after the Great Attack when I was assigned to her from the Ashenway house to help Matilda. Do you have any theories? Ren asked, still processing the strangeness of what he had just heard. Mayo shrugged. Matilda thinks it's some kind of code. I think it's simply a father just like his daughter, trying to communicate in an exaggerated way, something he can't say directly. But in the end, her expression became serious. That doesn't really matter anymore. Luna now hates Sirius and just wants to recover the relic. The relic? Ren straightened, his attention completely captured. The one that belongs to her. The light one from the twin stars, Larissa explained. The Starweaver artifacts that were used in the western sector during the battle. Now the faction opposed to Luna's has them, and they're using the battle's success to legitimize their control over them and the territories. It seems to mean too much to her, Leora added. More than just political value or military power. Larissa remained thoughtful for a moment, then nodded slowly. With Luna's documented achievements during the defense of the northern sector, it would be possible to argue that she should have custody of her faction's relic in her father's absence. But we would need quite a bit of support, and it won't be easy or quick with how noble bureaucrats are. Ren looked at the letter in his hand again, then carefully put it away. He thought about Sirius, about his decision to leave the city, about the cryptic and obsessive words he had left behind. He thought about Luna, about how she had fought so valiantly despite everything. His fists clenched. "I'm not just going to solve crystallization. I'm going to help Luna recover the relic," he declared, "however necessary." The words came out with more conviction than he had felt in a long time. For that, he thought, a new resolution forming in his mind. Maybe I'll have to embrace truly becoming a noble soon. The girls looked at him, recognizing the determination in his expression. But some blushed. Ren looked at them and lowered his gaze. He realized that indeed, the sheets had fallen to his waist during his dramatic declaration. He became aware once again that he was surrounded by girls, blushed, and quickly covered himself up to his neck. "If you can, could you leave so I can get dressed?" he murmured, avoiding eye contact. The girls exchanged glances. Then, as if they had reached a silent agreement, none of them moved. Leora smiled mischievously. Larissa tried to maintain a serious expression, but there was also a touch of amusement in her eyes. Several months had passed since the mutant invasion attempt, and there had been no new attacks during all that time. Although Luna had managed to prevent her faction from losing face being marked as abandonment of duty, her political situation remained precarious. Being a child didn't help. Having escaped from school had complicated things even further. And her uncles having achieved a great accomplishment on Yino's side with the Twin Stars had strengthened their position to the point where Luna's reward seemed insignificant in comparison. But the saving grace was that fortunately they had only been monetary advantages. Her territory had been saved thanks to her, at least for now. But the constant pressure remained there, threatening to crush her now smaller faction at any moment of weakness. Sirius still hadn't appeared. Had he fallen during his mission? Luna was becoming less and less efficient at pretending she didn't care about him. But today wasn't about politics. Today was about something that could change many things, or at least one person's capabilities greatly. Ren's room was large now, a significant improvement from the first shared space he'd occupied during his first year at the academy. Min, Taro, and Liu were positioned near his desk, their expressions mixing excitement with obvious anxiety. The girls occupied the other side of his part of the room near his bed. Luna maintained more distance, her eyes fixed on the point where the process would take place, clearly hoping to see if Moshito would finally return. Leora was closer, not trying to disguise her intense curiosity. Larissa maintained a more reserved posture, but her interlaced hands betrayed her nervousness. The maids and guards surrounded them. The professors formed a semicircle near the door. Lin had arrived early, but had let Ren skip half of the morning exercise to give him time to attenuate his anxiety. Zhao stood beside her, his arms tense. Wei and Yang flanked Ignatius, all observing with the attention of experts who rarely witnessed something of this magnitude at the prestigious school that would see this new record born. Julius and Selphira had preceded the gathering of those closer to the kid, as they had called the process of selecting who could attend. Many more had wanted to be present, but Ren had flatly refused to make the process public, or do something like ranking up on the esplanade, as if it were some kind of attraction. So there wasn't space, even in the spacious room, to allow everyone who could be there to attend. And Ren didn't want to disappoint a larger audience either. Not when he didn't know what would happen. He held the last gold-sized processed crystal in his hands, the last of 400 he had used to reach this rank, feeling the familiar but always significant weight of what he was about to do. Today's cultivations of his Wolverine and Diamond Hydra he had already done first, and since requiring less than 1/10 of the energy, they had been simple, following established patterns that everyone had seen before. They didn't even require great preparation even at the beast's overload limit, just good management and correct mana distributions. But the fungus was different. Not only did it require more strange materials like a mushroom from the golden spores, it also required external support so as not to break Ren's systems, or else his veins wouldn't withstand the enormous energy. When Ren took the final crystal, the largest and processed with the extreme care that only he knew was necessary, everyone in the room visibly tensed. The requirements were 10 times greater than for any normal beast reaching this same rank. Ren closed his eyes and began. The processed male shadow stalker tentacles from his reserve were already ready on the desk. Little by little he used them, passing them through the mana points in his body that were getting blocked with the high precision given by years of practice. It was a scene most present had witnessed many times, but it never ceased to generate anxiety seeing how Ren suffered as he pushed his system beyond what should be possible. The crystal began to disappear, its energy flowing toward Ren's system in waves that made his entire body illuminate from within. The veins in his arms became visible, pulsing with golden light as he channeled massive amounts of processed mana. Luna took a step forward without realizing it, her hands clenching until her fingers turned white. Min had to grab Liu's shoulder to keep himself in place. Even Lin, with all her past experience, felt her breathing quicken as she watched. The process intensified. The entire room began to vibrate subtly with the amount of energy Ren was processing. The decorative crystals on the walls resonated, creating a low-frequency hum that was felt in their mana systems more than heard in their ears. And then, something changed. Ren felt a connection forming, tenuous at first, but becoming stronger with each second. It was like touching something familiar after years of separation, recognizing a presence that had been a fundamental part of his identity. His fungus. His first beast was evolving. The sensation was pleasant after the pain of cultivation. An omniboost of 100%, as if he had a fourth power ring. The 3 hidden rings within the seed pulsed in response, resonating with the energy flowing through his system. The power grew exponentially, filling every cell of his body with an extra vitality of 400% that he had forgotten was possible to feel. His senses sharpened until he could hear individual heartbeats around the room. His perception of mana became crystalline, seeing the flows with perfect clarity. And then it began to diminish. "No," Ren murmured, trying to hold on to the connection that was escaping like sand between his fingers. "No, wait, I need you." But no matter how much effort he put in, the connection kept fading, little by little, inexorably, until it was finally completely lost. When Ren opened his eyes, tears were running down his cheeks. He hadn't recovered his initial beast from the cyst. The jade seed also remained broken, holding on by almost nothing. It had regenerated during these months, yes, but only minimally. "Ren," Lin began softly, approaching, but Ren shook his head, quickly wiping away the tears with the back of his hand. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice no longer sounding sad but resolved. I knew this was a possibility. But it's not everything, right?" Taro tried to cheer him up. "Maybe you can still. I don't think I'll be able to form another contract as things are," Ren interrupted, assuming the worst. "If I couldn't even recover my main beast, how am I going to?" He stopped when his fingers caressed with resignation the mantis egg he'd been keeping for years. The contact was casual, driven by unconscious longing more than deliberate intention. And he felt something. It wasn't anything like the complete connection with his fungus, but it was a possibility to advance that was there, pulsing softly under his touch. He could do it. He could form the 4th contract.